Welcome to Anecdotally Speaking, a podcast to help you build your story repertoire. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Callahan.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mark Schenk. And right, we're going to hook straight into it this week.
As we normally do, I think we should get right into it.
Yeah, no housekeeping, straight into it. It's your hook, and you've got a scientific story for us.
Yes, I know. I do like a scientific story. I reckon this would be great for anyone who has an audience that, engineers or scientists or, mathematically oriented folk in your organization. I think they'd appreciate this story. I guess one of the things I learned from this was that, the great insights, often come from, breaking free from an assumption. You got this core assumption that everyone believes in. If you can break that assumption, it can have this massive impact. Well, this year, a mathematician called June Ha, June as in the month of June, Ha, well, he spelt H-U-H, but kind of sounds like H-A exclamation mark, right? I think he's an American Korean, born in Stanford, went to Korea when he was, I think, 2 or 3, grew up in Korea, went to university there. And interestingly, he never really, in his early days, had a particular interest in mathematics. And, he was more interested in poetry in high school. He actually dropped out of high school for a bit, just so he could be a poet. But that didn't work out. So he went to university and he fuffed about trying to work out what he wanted to do. And it took him 6 years to do his undergraduate. And he eventually signed up for a course that kind of changed his life. And the course was another mathematician, a Japanese mathematician called Hisuke Hironaka, who'd won the Fields Medal back in 1970. Excuse me. He was, super charismatic, sort of quirky guy. And he was teaching a course on algebraic geometry, which Hart sort of signed up for. And when they started that course, there was 200 students, and within 3 weeks, it had whittled down to 5 students, right? And partly is because he didn't do it in the standard way. What he did was he just taught what he was working on himself personally, as a Fields Medal level mathematician. You can imagine just how complex that would have been. But he was working on problems that he didn't even know he was, grappling with the right thing or having the right answer. It was just total exploration. And to Hart, this was so exciting, right? This idea that you could take sort of that creative approach to problem solving was just blew him away. So he became a disciple, really, of that particular professor, Hironaka, and worked with him. Eventually, he did his master's with Hironaka and then eventually PhD. About 2009, he was working on his PhD in the US. And interestingly, within a very short period of time, he solves one of the great conjectures that hadn't been solved for 40 years, right? It was unproven for 40 years. And he comes along and absolutely nails it. And then building on that, and with all this work that he's doing, he does a lot of work on sort of geographic and sort of spatial elements and polynomials and pulling all this together. He solves another conjecture called the Rotors conjecture. So now he's on this roll, right? And he starts working with some colleagues, and together they do this amazing work. And then, this year in 2022, he's 39 now. He wins the Fields Medal. Now, the Fields Medal is like the Nobel Prize of mathematics, right? It is awarded every few years. And, like if you win the Fields Medal, you can do anything you want in the field of mathematics. But what I loved is that as he was talking in a magazine article I was reading about that insight of the breakthrough, the big breakthrough occurred when it hit upon him that you don't need to think about space three-dimensional space or even n-dimensional space when doing geometry. So his big assumption, of course, everyone's assumption is geometry is about space. And he just flipped that on its head and said, actually, no, it doesn't have to be about space all the time. And as a result of that, he created new techniques. He created a whole new approaches and solved one of the other big conjectures that was sitting out there unsolved and unproven for such a long time. And that got him the Fields Medal. So I think it's a great example for me as an extreme example, I suppose, of ridding yourself of an assumption to get an insight. And I think this is something we can do in our organizations. What assumptions are we living under, that are constraining what we see, what we're noticing? And how do we identify those assumptions? And how do you, sort of pull them away so you can see things from a different perspective? I think that's what June Ha really shown is so powerful.
Oh, fabulous. Fabulous. And so what did he win the Fields Medal for?
Well, if it almost you need to be a mathematician to understand.
Mark, you wouldn't understand.
I didn't. I tried to have a bit of an understanding, but no, it's just imagine, he's using, a whole new way of thinking about, I can't even say it. It's to do with language. Doesn't mean anything to me, quite frankly.
And frankly, you don't need it. That was just kind of
an interest. It's good to be interested in these things. Yeah.
But I always think that it's important to understand the questions that people have of you when you tell a story, because it gives you insight into the things that you might need to add in to make that story even better.
I read this story in the Quantum magazine, and all the mathematics of there was explained. So we'll put that link in the URL or in the notes for this podcast, and people can go and have a read if they're interested.
I can, I won't be.
You won't be going there. Okay, well, it's there, right? It's there.
Yeah.
So what do you reckon? What did you like?
Well, I think it was good of you at the start to say this story will appeal to this group of people, very, very technical people who have kind of a scientific bent, a scientific mathematical focus.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, most definitely. Because I can imagine if you told this to a group of, maybe bankers or something like that, frontline workers, they'd just be looking at you like you're on another planet. You're just at cross purposes, aren't you? You sort of have to be telling this story to a certain group of people, I think.
Well, that's right. And for example, for many of our audience, you would need to explain what a conjecture is. Yeah,
right. Exactly. But if you're into maths and stuff like that, people will understand it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. One of the things that I liked about it that sticks in my mind is the Japanese mathematician when he was at university, who started with 200 students, and within 2 weeks it was down to 5. I thought that's a really good part of it. And I can just I've got this picture of this, kind of eccentric mathematician,
right, Japanese
mathematician with the leather elbow pads on his jacket, and a piece of chalk in his hand, and 5 students watching him doodle on enormous blackboards with pieces of chalk.
That's it. That's a great image. Actually, I should have said something like that.
Yeah,
I can imagine that too. Yeah.
I think that part of it also for me is kind of explains Ha's. That's where he got his bit of passion. And now you said that, but for me, that opens up another potential use of the story.
Yes,
which is
in my telling that story, I had to try to work out how to tell it, because really there was only one line in the article that I really grabbed me, and I was thinking that's the point I want to make, and that where he actually says you don't need space to do geometry, and then he followed that on. I probably should have said this. He then said that made me really fundamentally rethink what geometry is. Right. And so, he has this massive insight. Now, because I can't really explain the mathematics of it, I decided rather than going into that, I would tell the sort of story of his life leading up to that. He wins, he works out, he gets through the university, he, sort of all the various things that I mentioned, just so that I could say that, right? That's where I was aiming for, if you like, because I just wanted to make this point about assumptions and insights, right? Anyway, I just so to say that in terms of our listeners and sort of thing, so how do you come at a story when you can't explain one element? So there's a totally different telling of this story, which is a telling that a mathematician could tell other mathematicians. Do you know what I mean? About how he actually tackled that problem. And but I don't have the ability to do that. Yeah. I think the other thing yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to move on to business applications.
Oh, okay, business applications. Yeah. The one I have in my mind at the moment is, and this came about with our story-powered data program, how analysts need a way to notice things and draw out insights from data. And, and one of the, I guess, ways is to change the assumption, right? And so this is a story to tell to make that point. So that's where all this began, is me thinking of different stories I needed to build out our story-powered data program. So that's where it's come from.
Cool. So
yeah, go.
Yeah, but for me, another application of that story is about the importance of finding a passion, and how he tried many different things, dropped out from university, wasn't a very good mathematician, did poetry, and then this eccentric maths professor.
Yeah, and lit his mind on fire, and he was away. Yeah. It does show you how some of those teachers can be so important, right? Those charismatic.
Okay, there's another business application.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's potentially another thing, right? Because apparently you said he wasn't that, maths wasn't a strength at school.
Well, it wasn't an interest at school,
right? Okay.
Yeah, he discovered it was a strength, but it wasn't an interest.
Yeah. There's something that from if you're talking to people about their careers, and because it's a hard thing, right? What am I going to do? Is this the right thing to do? And it's like maybe there's no right thing to do. You just try stuff till you find your passion. Let me talk to you about this guy who won the Fields Medal for mathematics.
That's it. It's like in our family at the moment, my nephew Zach did an apprenticeship to become a carpenter, and he's very skilled at that sort of stuff. But about a year or so into it, he sort of went, well, I'm not too sure I want to do this. And now he's gone back to uni to be a filmmaker, right? Talk about totally different sort of line of work. And as soon as I heard that, I sort of went, oh, that's fantastic. He's trying to work out what he really loves doing. And in your 20s, that's what it's all about, right? It's about trying all these different things. I know for me, I didn't really work out what I want to do and this storytelling stuff until I probably late 30s before I got into that, right? So yeah, I think this is a nice point about I'm a bit worried about this idea of finding your passion, though. I'm not too sure that's actually what you do. I think you try stuff, you end up finding you're kind of good at it. People recognize you for your good work, and it eventually builds into a passion. I think that's how it actually works, as opposed to, hey, I'm just going to find my passion. Anyway, that's another little aside.
Well, okay. I'm not buying that one. Just
not buying that one. Okay,
that's just an interesting opinion that you have, but
based on experience. It's not just an opinion.
Well, last week's story was about the Wright brothers and about how they were passionate about flight, and that led to their success. So maybe.
Yeah, but
passion
we
does
don't.
have
But
a-
we don't know whether the Wright brothers how they got into it. Maybe they're working with their bicycles and they're thinking, "Gee, this is pretty cool," and something happens that gets into
All
flying.
right, let's.
There's a lot of possibilities.
Okay. Let's not. Let's extract ourselves from that rabbit hole.
No,
And
love a rabbit hole. Love to go down rabbit holes.
all right, so let's give it a rating. So
okay, go for it.
Yep, it's my turn, and
Yep.
I'm going to give that a 5. That story, it's a 5, and it's just too complex for me. I'm never going to use it. It's
cool. I think for me, this is probably, I'm going to be telling you quite a bit. So probably this is probably a strong 8 or 9 for me. I'd say somewhere in the 8.5. Let's give it that. So yeah, it's a good little story for me. Fits with my interests, I think, as well.
Yeah, and that's right. So in the right, in the right hands, it's one of those things. The story, it has to be relevant, and for me, it doesn't work. For you, though, of course, you love this stuff, and when you're working with data storytelling, it's fantastic.
Yeah,
right?
it makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that's probably all we need to say. Anything else we need to share with our listeners before we head off, Mark? Or except to say maybe that the Story Powered Data Program is now on our events page. I think you can go and sign up for it. So that's something you can
indeed.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for listening in to Anecdotally Speaking. Yes, and tune in next week for another episode on how to put your stories to work. Bye for now.